youth-led project with Asfar and the Resolve Network that was started during lockdown to give people a chance to talk about issues of reconciliation and lots of other stuff and really whatever. And I am Malcolm. I'm in Brčko in Bosnia, and I'm a volunteer with the Resolve project and Asfar, which is going great. And I would like to introduce Chrissie Browne, who is from the Widening Participation Department at King's College London, and she's working on a project called Rombelong, which has taken the form of a tutoring project which supports Gypsy, Roma and Traveller people in the UK in their education. And she's going to talk about education, Gypsy, Roma and Traveller people, and discrimination. And I think it's going to be really fun. I'm going to learn something. And yeah, I'll just hand over to you, Chrissie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Malcolm. And thank you for inviting me to talk. It's really nice, and it's always nice to do these things. And I think this is as far as afield as my little project has gone outside of London. So before this, it was Darlington up north in England, which is near Manchester. It's not near Manchester, but that's like, it's up that way. So it's quite exciting, really. Like he says, I work in the King's College London Widening Participation Department, and it's quite a mouthful, but basically what the department does is that we try to increase representation of groups that are underrepresented at university. So if you look at how the structure of the country and then you look at the people going into university, we are there to aim to make sure that that's equitable and that looks like our country looks, and universities should represent the country as a whole. My particular area of work at the moment is with Gypsies, Roma and Travellers, and Malcolm was right, so the Rombelong programme is the overarching umbrella. Part of that is the tutoring project, which at the moment because of COVID is our main project. However, I'll sort of talk a little bit more about it as a whole and what we hope to achieve. So, so the content, so we're going to first sort of start maybe who are Gypsies, Roma and Travellers. So this is, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the situation as well. I talk from a UK focus, and that's why I'm sort of saying who are Gypsies, Roma and Travellers, as I know there might be people here that have got lots of sort of different knowledges and a knowledge base. So hopefully we'll all be on the same page. Then we'll talk a little bit about the WP approach and what else needs to be done on a sort of societal level as well, which is pretty big. And I'm not saying that I can do it on a societal level, but the hope for the future. So first of all, we're going to have a little activity, and this is going to be a very quick activity. I want you to pop in the chat, in the Zoom chat, if you don't know how to use it. If you look at the bottom of your screen, I believe there should be a chat function. I'm sure we're all used to Zoom these days. And I just want you to pop in there who your favourite Gypsy is, or Roma or Traveller person. So it could be someone famous, it could be an activist, it could be a friend or a family member, anyone you like. So just take 10-15 seconds. And if you can't think of anyone, maybe just pop in a question mark. But yeah, so just think about famous Gypsies that you might know. I'm also a traveller, so if you don't have anyone, feel free to put my name in there. I'm not humble. Okay, lovely. Tyson Fury, yes, I've got lots of kids that like Tyson Fury. I don't know. Oh, I don't know these people. Wonderful. Ah. Interesting. I love it because sometimes you get lots of people that are just like, I have no idea. And then sometimes you get some like really interesting names to look up afterwards. And I find that fascinating. And it's okay if you had to really search your memory banks. Like we don't, and we'll come on to the reasons of that in a moment. So moving on now, what I want you to do is I want you to write in the chat what comes to mind when you hear the word Gypsy. And this could be, I mean, this is where I encourage you to think of the negative media stories that you've heard, or things you hear from family, or anecdotes, or your own personal experiences. I've got a very thick skin, and I do quite enjoy hearing sort of different stories I haven't heard before. If there is something that you think is a slur word, just star it out in the middle. And there's a couple of words that spring to mind. But yeah, so pop in the chat and think all the things that come into your mind when you hear the word gypsy or traveller, if you're a kind of a UK person. I know that it's not mostly used in Europe, the term traveller. Yes, you can write negative themes. And I will never think that it's you that writes it. We're in a safe space here. So I would never think that it's your own thoughts. But yeah, things you read in the newspaper, yeah, kind of to give you, big fat gypsies, weddings, thieves. Yeah, exactly. There we are. There we are. I knew that they were there. Lovely. I'll just give you sort of 10 more seconds for anyone that's got any more stories lurking at the back of their mind. Okay. So I think that kind of just shows, I mean, very briefly, that was a sort of a 20-second exercise. And imagine how difficult it was to think of a famous traveller. Think of how difficult it was just then to think of someone that had a positive connotation. And we've got this sort of a couple of things about the kind of the traditionals and the cultures, or the colourful dresses and the music. But actually, the things that were coming to mind are much more sort of begging, selling heather, ripping people off, and rubbish is a big one, and kind of, and I don't know, in the UK framework as well, it's sort of pulling onto public land, causing lots of mess. In the European mind frame, it could be sort of destroying property, destroying housing, not wanting to work, begging, things like that. And these are the things. I mean, travellers don't exist in a different world to the rest of the population. So everything that you know about us, we have grown up knowing that's what is thought. So when we kind of think about sort of people thinking about aggressive behaviour or defensive behaviour, if you know from a very young age that people don't like you just because of who you are, that's gonna cause some sort of very sort of damaged people. I mean, I remember growing up and hearing people in my school talk about Gyppos, and I was living on a site and they didn't know that, and I didn't tell them that, but the way that they were talking and the way that their families were talking, and they'd heard it from their parents, and it goes sort of generational, and it makes you feel, it made me feel kind of dirty. It made me feel very different. And that's just one story. I can't talk on behalf of Gypsies or Roma or travellers. I can only talk about my own experience. But if the public consciousness is negative and there's nothing positive to but as a balance, I had no positive role models in film or TV that I could look up to growing up. I mean, Esmeralda is, it's a cartoon, and that was the only Gypsy that I knew. And there's like massive problematic things about Disney, as we know. And it's sort of slowly maybe changing, but very slowly. And to be honest, I think we can do better than Tyson Fury, the boxer. So that's sort of what I just wanted to kind of start off with that. There. So, and please me, I do not believe that any of you think these things that you've put in the chat, but it's important to kind of remember that this is in public consciousness. So who are Gypsies, Roma and Travellers when we talk about them? So the GRT is used in the UK as a kind of a catch-all when it comes to funding and to research and things like that. And it is problematic in itself because, again, it's putting three distinct ethnicities all together. So European Roma people have very different barriers to an English Gypsy. If you're sort of a first or second generation migration to the UK, that's going to be your barriers are going to include language, it's going to include citizenship, that how Roma are treated in Europe is still much worse than I would say, from my opinion, how Gypsies and Travellers are treated in the UK, and we're not exactly flavour of the month over here. But it is what that's the framework we work in. So G is standing for the Romany Gypsies, so also known as English Gypsies, and they came to the UK sort of during the Roma migration over 500 years ago. And after this, I'll link to a lovely YouTube video that I hope Malcolm will send round, which explains this whole migration so much more beautifully than I ever could, mostly because it was made by artists and not by me. But they're sort of ethnically English but their ethnicity is Romany Gypsy. So they've got their own sort of language. It's called Romanesque. No, it's called Romany. Romanesque is a different version used by European Roma. And they could live in caravans or they could live in houses. Although it's a traditionally nomadic existence, it doesn't mean that it's nomadic now. 80% of Gypsies and Travellers in the UK live in housing. Yet when we look at some statistics in a minute, I'll show you that the nomadic lifestyle is not the crux of the issue. Because if it was the crux of the issue, there's only very few people living that lifestyle now. Like me, myself, and my family all live in houses. We haven't lived in caravans since I was a kid. But as it's an ethnicity, it doesn't mean I'm less of a traveller. It's a white ethnicity and it's a culture, but it's still classified as an ethnicity. So then we come on to the European Roma, and that's the kind of common name for the Roma communities across Europe, especially sort of the Eastern Europe. And like I say, I don't know this isn't my area of expertise of what it's like in Europe, only what the Roma communities have in the UK. And there's a lot of barriers and sort of kind of a very big mistrust and misunderstanding of a knowledge of systems. And sort of working with Roma Support Group and other Roma charities, it stems from sort of the treatment in Europe of Roma. In some countries, it's getting to the point of, sort of sterilisation and pogrom. So it is still a very massive issue, which I don't have an expertise on, but it is something that is shocking. And then we come to Travellers, which is where I come in. So Travellers comes from sort of the Celtic travellers, and so there's sort of indigenous nomadic roots. My family is Irish traveller. I don't sound Irish, obviously. So my dad was Irish. My dad is Irish traveller. I've lived here my whole life. I have no accent. It's sort of a very dull accent, as in there isn't one. So it's sort of a slightly separate language, but the different migration times could be coming over from Ireland or Scotland or Wales now or in the past, and sort of similar barriers to Romany Gypsies. So those are the GRT that we talk about. And why is it important that we do outreach with Gypsies, Roma and Travellers? So again, all these data is from the UK. And this is the Progress A score. So Progress A is something that it's a score that it sort of shows how well they'll do when they go to high school. I think it's like the year 11 SATs and year 6 SATs. I am really bad at knowing what they do in schools these days. But if we look at the national average, and then we look where Gypsies and Roma are, Irish Travellers didn't even factor onto this one, which is another issue with sort of data recording as well. But you can see that they are already below average when it's in year 6. And then when we look at this kind of here, the sort of the size of the ethnicity gap. So when they're in early years, so early years education is sort of the year 4, age 4, so age just before reception class, and like after nursery. So they're already sort of 6, 7, 8 months behind their peers, which is a lot for a 4-year-old to be. I mean, what could have happened into that point that they're already that far behind? But then as they progress through school, that gap increases to over 3 years of education by the time it's 60, by the time people are 16. And so where, sort of my question is, when it comes to working in this area, is we know there's an issue. I mean, these statistics have not changed for the last 30 years. We know there's an issue, and we know that issue gets worse. Why isn't that number decreasing over the years? Why are they, something happens, and it gets worse. I mean, up till very recently in academic textbooks, they were saying that gypsies and travellers were just generally not as bright as other people, which, as we know, science has completely debunked the idea that, whole groups of people are just not as intelligent as other people. It sort of gets to the point of eugenics, that type of thing. It's like, oh, they're just not as good. So we need to look at those cultural, societal issues that are causing this gap, because it shouldn't be there, especially not in a country that is, sort of supposedly has got these wonderful systems in place for social care. So that's what we're looking at in education, but it's not just about education. So with people, we're all holistic whole beings. We don't operate in, this is my education brain, this is my home brain, this is, that's not how a whole person works, as we know. And this is where I think some of the issues kind of come into how we deal with children in education, not just gypsies and travellers, but all kids. The idea that they go to school and that is there, then we don't all have that same 24 hours. And that's why rich kids will do better than poor kids. These are the other reasons of what's going on. So with gypsies and travellers, so we represent sort of up to 20% of the prison population, which is a lot in a country of 65 million people, or whatever it is in the UK, I don't know. But we're also only 0.1% of the population, which is mad. That's an overrepresentation to the nth degree. Like kind of almost every male member of my family has been into prison at some point, and I grew up thinking that was normal. And every one of my friends as a traveller has had someone that's been in prison at some point. Whereas all of my friends that aren't travellers are like, that's weird. When I saw my Uncle Jim on Crime Watch one day, I was like, oh, it's my Uncle Jim. And, I thought it was a funny story. Turns out it's not funny to other people. So we need to look at that sort of like, where is this? So if you're a young person and your dad's in prison, that's going to affect your school life. That's going to affect how you learn and how you interact with systems as well, and interact with the government. And then also on the health side of things, so only 6% of gypsies, Roma and travellers are over 65. So kind of, if we're just working purely on statistics, I'm over halfway through my life expectancy, and I'm 31. So almost halfway through my life expectancy. It doesn't work out so well. It doesn't sound as cool when I say that, but of course, statistics are not, you can't go by that, because there's so many other factors in my life that will affect my life expectancy. But is that the same for other members of my family? Are they going to reach 65? And 65 is a very young age, I found out from my husband, who's not a gypsy. Whereas when we talk about people reaching 65 in our families, it's, oh, they've got to a good age, and it's only recently I realised that 65 is not a good old age for most people. I mean, that's not even the retirement age. And we can't go into the reasons of these things, but I just want to kind of let you know sort of what the kind of the stark reality is. So if you're a young person and you're at school, but your dad's in prison, your cousin's just committed suicide, and you've got to care for your gran that's got COPD, or emphysema, I think it used to be called. My degree's in healthcare, so so if you're that young person and you're at school and your teacher's telling you off because you're behind, you already don't understand what's been said. Your dad's in prison, your gran's at home, so you can't do your homework when you get home because you've got to look after her, and your cousin's just committed suicide and no one's talking about it. And people might think that is a very extreme example. I know 3 personal friends that had that situation at high school, 3 personal friends. So it's not extreme when you see the amount of the statistics that are accruing. So when we're talking about getting people to university, is that the thing that's going to be on people's minds? You know, it's even going to university is something that is, I loved it. I went as a mature student in my late 20s. But if you've got all of those other things going on, your parents aren't going to be thinking about university. They're going to be thinking about all this other horrific stuff that's happening in life. And why would you want to put your child through the system that has already failed you, it's failed your parents, and you don't want it to fail them as well? So after that depressing note, I'm going to bring it up a notch, and I'm going to talk to you about what we're doing at King's College London Widening Participation Department. Wow, we've got to think of a cooler name. So we just call it WP. And like I say, we don't just work with Gypsies, Roma and Travellers. I don't think that anyone would fund it. But the department is very lucky. We've got a very big department with wonderful big programs for all underrepresented groups, full of people that my colleagues are wonderful and really care as well, which is, you need to do it in this line of work. But the work with Gypsy, Roma and Traveller, so we do that, and it's quite young, and that's Rombelong, and we started a few years ago with a report that King's did, and I'll get Malcolm to link that report after this for people that are interested. So the first sort of thing, if we sort of start in the middle, I've put these all in the wrong order, is addressing the barriers when and where they occur. So this is where the tutoring project started back in lockdown. And that is, we made it an age inclusive project. So that means we've got kids on it that are as young as 4 and as old as 18. And if we remember back into those statistics that I spoke about at the beginning, by making it age inclusive means that hopefully if we can catch that attainment gap at the beginning, it won't get bigger. It will just sort of snub out, you know, and then they can kind of keep on, they can catch up and keep on going, rather than a lot of programs that wait till people are already out of education. So if I was just wanting to work with 15-year-olds or 16-year-olds, they're already 3 years behind. So I'd actually be working with, they wouldn't be ready for university because they'd be working at a age 12 level or already out of the education system or in a pupil referral unit. Whereas if we can keep people interested in education from a young age and foster that love of learning that all kids have. I don't believe that any kid doesn't love learning. It's just finding out what they want to learn and how they want to learn and giving them that opportunity and that power to say, this is how I want to learn. So all of our tutoring is done one-to-one with a professional tutor, but we give them a lot of freedom. So we don't have a work set. We don't say we want them all to be A-star students by X point, or they all need to be wanting to be a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer. We say, you know, if you want to spend 3 weeks reading the Tyson Fury biography, go for it. The kid's reading, that's brilliant, you know. And what we saw and what we keep seeing is the confidence and the enjoyment of learning is growing and growing and growing because the kids are being treated as an individual. They're building a relationship with their tutor that is positive when so much of education is framed negatively. If you're in a class and you're behind and you don't understand and your teacher's shouting at you, it's not going to make you want to learn all of a sudden. We had one of our lovely students who was having that issue at school, and now he's in the top set of maths when he was failing maths. So, you know, and it's like, but we never said he had to learn maths. It was something that came and grew organically out of that trusting relationship between the tutor and the young person. So that's the most important thing I think about the tutoring, is that individualized approach. So we know the families, we talk to every family that is brought onto the program, and we talk to the students and the tutors. So if my tutors are supported, they can support the student. If the mum is supported, they can support their child. And this is an approach that King's takes across all of our work in WP. It's relational. You know, people before programs is a buzzword. You know, we do a lot of community organising, and we're a partner of Citizens UK, a community organising they're not a company, but, you know, like a organization. And it takes time and it takes effort, and there's no kind of shortcuts, but the payoffs are, you know, they're worth it. Every time you see a piece of work that a kid who said he was never going to learn algebra, all of a sudden doing algebra. I don't think I remember algebra, like, you know, so it's been beautiful in a ways that I couldn't even imagine it would have been. And it's a program that we created because of COVID. When the kids in April, when the UK went into its first lockdown, and it went in very suddenly, and the schools were not prepared. There was worries that, you know, kids would not be learning at home. And then if we look back at all those other issues that we saw that Gypsies and Roma and Travellers face, so their parents might not have finished school, Roma especially, parents might not speak English, and, you know, might not have laptops and tablets or internet connections, and all these things that we take for granted, lots of people took for granted. And it was only the pandemic that shone a light on these issues. Like, I work in the area, I knew they existed before, but it was almost like a shock to people, and which I don't think is a good thing, but hopefully it means that we're going to move to a more equitable future, because kids need access to the internet. Like, it's not back in the day when a textbook would do, you know, it's a different world we're living in. But yeah, when we started back in April, it was done by volunteer tutors that we found on Twitter that were amazing, and everyone was in their lockdown. But then as they went back to work, we needed sort of something more long term, and we got more funding, partnered with a organisation called the Traveller Movement, who are still our partners on the project, and we have 120 kids on it from our initial 15, and the engagement attendance rate is sort of 80-90%, which is high for any kids, let alone kids that have been sort of disengaged with education, or that people say Gypsies don't care about education, because that's the other thing I get. People say, you know, Gypsies just don't want to learn, and that's, I think it's mad, and also it's wrong. Like, I have parents contacting me every day, and we're fully booked on the program. We have no more. We're oversubscribed, and we can't do a waiting list. So we, you know, because we've got so many people that are wanting it. So it's nice to dispel those myths. And when we talk about dispelling myths, that brings me smoothly on to my next point, which is being vocal advocates. And this is where it's, I think it's important that people speak out, and it shouldn't just be to the people that it affects. Like, I get so tired about talking about being a traveller. Oh, every single one of my traveller friends is an activist, or, I mean, I'm not an activist, I just do a job, but, or works in this industry, is tired and burnt out from sort of explaining and talking. And when things are left to individuals, that's what happens. You know, movements, they need individuals, but they can't just stay there. It can't just stay with that individual level. And this is where somewhere as big as King's, like a big Russell Group university, being so vocal, so loud about it, and putting our money where our mouth is, you know, that sort of, it's not just lip service. It's so important, because policy will never change, society will never change, public consciousness will never change until people with power care. And although there might be 2 million Gypsies in the UK, or tens of millions Roma in Europe, we're still a tiny drop in the ocean. And we have no, you know, the power we have is very little. It's very easy for governments to ignore, because we'll never be the majority. And with public consciousness and the media representation, we'll never have public saying, oh, this negative image in the paper, this negative story in the paper that I've read, why does it matter that they were a traveller? If they were anyone else, would we say that this traveller family left a mess, or this traveller did a bad driveway, or, you know, I'm not saying that these people weren't travellers and they didn't do that, but if every Gypsy or traveller in the UK was a criminal, we would be living in some sort of dystopian future. If all million of us were out there committing all these crimes, then if you see what I mean. So it's sort of changing that public discourse and that public information and being vocal about it and being positive about it. Whenever we talk about Gypsies, Roma and Travellers, it's either talking about the problems we cause or how far behind we are and how depressing everything is. Like, I know that I started this presentation talking about how depressing everything was, but I don't want to end it like that. I don't want it to be that it's a depressing and sad situation, because it's not. There are amazing people doing amazing work, but we need more people and more power and more vocality. Don't even think that's a word, but more vocal, more people being vocal about the situation. And that's the only way we'll get societal change. And actually, I started talking about that before I started talking about embedding and integration. So now I'm going to take a little step back, talking about big societal change. But big societal change cannot happen if we keep doing separate programs for Gypsies, Roma and Travellers, or for anyone. And this is where programs like Rombelong are lovely and wonderful, but they shouldn't need to exist. And what we're working to do in the WP department is embedding and integrating it into our mainstream program. So rather than othering Gypsies, Roma and Travellers, making sure that the work that we do is inclusive, and making sure that every school we talk to knows the importance of working with Gypsies, Roma and Travellers to make sure that they've got an equitable education, making sure that anyone that wants to be on our programs that's from a Gypsy, Roma or Traveller background is prioritised. So if they don't reach the grades, we know that it's not because they're not capable, because of all the other things that happen in their life. So we can drop those grade boundaries. We can, if they need some extra academic support, we can provide that pastoral support, work experience of kind of contacts. So it's important to address the barriers, but it's more important to make sure that the world that we live in, or the university that we work in, or the youth organisation that we run, is aware of the issues and is willing and able and equipped to make it a space that Gypsies, Roma and Travellers feel welcome in. And that's the most important thing, is that we belong at university. We belong as doctors, as lawyers, as engineers. But the neoliberal landscape that we live in, that it's the individual's choice whether they go to university or if they've made the grades, is wrong. We don't live in a meritocracy. That is so far from where we are. If one person can rise up above adversity, then the neoliberal idea that everyone can needs dispelling. We need to make sure that the society we live in is a welcoming and able place for everyone that is a part of that society. And whether that's just a university or just a school or just a youth group, the idea is that we need to be talking about it and we need to make sure that it happens. So on that note, kind of takes me over to my last page. And this is what I always call my work. And in the nicest possible way, I enjoy what I do and I think I make a small difference, but it's like a band-aid over a bullet wound. And I use the Americanism because it sounds better than a plaster, which is the UK word for a band-aid or a plaster, But there's only so much that we can do, and it needs to be systemic change, but that can only happen if more people do something. So it's a bit of a catch-22. And the governments of whatever country it is aren't going to care until the people care. And the people aren't going to care until we can get rid of some of the myths and stereotypes that are around. And that brings me to the end of what I'm going to say, and open up to any questions.
Thanks very much, Chrissie. If anyone has, I have a question, but if anyone has a question now, please, you can write it in the chat, and I'll give it out. But if not, yeah, Sheila, hi.
I found that really interesting. I've worked in higher education for 30 years with disabled students. And I just wondered, Christine, have you got any figures? I mean, how many actually from those groups that you're talking about are actually in higher education, and breaking them down into the sexes as well? I mean, I'm assuming it's very hard for young women who want to go on to study. And again, this is stereotypical that I assume people get married younger.
Yeah.
So just if you had any figures, I'd just be interested.
Yeah, so the numbers in, sorry, I think there's a lag, so I'm so sorry I talked over you. Yes, I do have lots of figures. I think my internet is unstable, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. That normally fix it. Is it? Am I freezing for anyone, or am I okay?
Fine.
I think I might have frozen. No?
Nope.
Okay.
It's okay. I think it's okay. Yeah.
Right. So the figures for university entrance. Yeah. Okay. And maybe I've got a lag of people coming in. I've turned off all of your cameras to help me. I do apologise. So last year there was 100 UCAS applications in the whole country for Gypsies, Roma and Travellers, and only 80 spaces that went to them. So it's thought that 2% of Gypsies, Roma and Travellers go to university, compared to 43% of the national population. The numbers are quite difficult because each university, the statistics are so low for each university that they never reach their public, kind of the statistics that get given to the public. Because I mean, for King's, for instance, a couple of years ago, there was 7 students that were of Gypsy, Roma or Traveller, that ticked the Gypsy, Roma or Traveller ethnicity box. So that would never reach any mainstream statistics because it would just be swallowed up in the 30,000 students at King's. There's some wonderful reports that I will link to that are much more in depth than what I kind of can talk about in the confines of this talk. But with regards to gender, I think the numbers are so low that gender, it's not a huge sort of factor in those numbers at university. If you look at the numbers of students reaching 6th form, then there's more girls than boys that go to 6th form. But again, the numbers are so low that we don't know if it's gender or because it's just not a big enough sample size.
Right. And sorry, just to follow in on, sorry, Malcolm, I know you've got a question. I mean, is it out of that 100 or whatever that apply, is there more students that would apply for distance learning courses because they're moving around or not?
No, that doesn't seem to be an issue. I think the people that get to I think it's sort of a knowledge issue. So the people that get to the stage of university are going to be the best of people because they have gone through every sort of stage so far. So what you see is sort of the people that go to university make that big active decision. There's also sort of more of a move of mature students that go back to uni after they've left school very young or just at normal age. But the nomadic issue, like I say, sort of, so I don't think I mentioned it very heavily, but 80% of Gypsies, Roma and Traveller, I mean, Roma especially don't in the UK don't live in nomadic lifestyles. Gypsies and Travellers, 80% of Gypsies and Travellers don't live a nomadic lifestyle. It's a very small number of us that are still in that lifestyle, but it doesn't change the outcomes by not living the nomadic lifestyle. And in fact, it decreases the health outcomes because of sort of assimilation and moving away from family and culture.
Yeah, if there are any more questions, you can write them. But I have one, which is about this thing you said. Well, towards the end, perhaps you were talking about the responsibility of everyone to be advocates and the responsibility of community. I guess I wonder if there needs to be like a shift in how people view, how, let's say, the 99% of people who aren't travellers view travellers, or in Eastern Europe, perhaps it's more like 4% of people are travellers, so 96%. Whether they view them as a separate community or whether they view them as part of the same community that we're all living in. And I guess that's one question: how do you make people see it as these are other people in our community, rather than just like, oh, they're over there and that's their problem?
I'd say that, I mean, some of it needs to come from councils and local authorities. Need to actually spend their fund. They get funded. They get a lot of money every year to fund proper sites that are fit for human habitation. They don't like having sites there because the local communities don't want them because of the perceived issues of rubbish. But if you have a proper site that is funded, that as paid tax on, like we paid council tax, we paid rent rates, we paid, you know, if you've got a proper council site, just like you'd have a council house, we pay to live there. We pay council tax, we pay. So when they started removing them in the 90s, and what that means is so that now there's hardly any proper sites. And so we've got a massive homelessness issue. We've also got a housing issue in the UK. So it's sort of like, where do you expect people to go? And then if councils aren't spending the money that they get funded for gypsies and travellers, then they're not going to have habitable places to live. And that's going to cause the issues of rubbish, but also, and things like that. But actually, if you look at it, then a story that I always say is when you see a king-size mattress near a traveller site and people go, oh, the travellers chucking out their mattresses. I'm like, there's not a trailer in the world that can fit a king-size mattress, you know? So it's, yes, I'm not saying that all travellers don't leave mess. I'm saying is that everyone leaves mess. I look out my door. If there wasn't street sweepers every morning, London would be a nightmare. But it's more visible because there isn't street sweepers, because there's no proper sites or habitation. It becomes a massive issue. And so if you look at all those sort of ingrained ideas, and then people will never want a proper site because they're like, oh, well, we know this is what happens. And like, but actually, if you look at areas with proper sites that have been funded properly, then there's a decrease in crime in the local area. There's a decrease in rubbish in the local area. But people don't see that because that's not mentioned in the news. Sorry.
We've got a question from Sally in the chat. I don't know if you can see that, Christine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, of course. So the word gypsy is not a slur in the UK, and it's in all the sort of ethnicity documents. I normally say this at the beginning, and I do apologise that I didn't. In the European context, the word gypsy is considered a slur. And it makes it difficult, especially with work in the UK, that it is all under the GRT umbrella, because people have in their job titles the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller service. And if you're a Roma and you consider the word gypsy a slur, that's very problematic. And I find it very problematic myself. But then there's people in the UK that are gypsies because it's the term that we have historically used. Like my family wouldn't call ourselves Roma, or the Romany gypsies I know wouldn't call themselves Roma, they would call themselves gypsies. So it becomes this language becomes very problematic when we are dealing with three separate ethnicities, especially with the European context where gypsy is a slur word in many countries. So,
any other questions?
I don't know if that answers it.
Yes, that does answer it. Thank you very much, because it was very confusing for me, and we always have this discussion. But yeah, so it was very, and it also thank you for the presentation. It really cleared up a lot of things for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Okay, anyone else?
I would maybe just ask, when you were talking about this tutoring program that you have, for me, it was very interesting to hear that you include so younger age children, because normally when you have preparation for anything, if it's for college, then you would just include the children who are like one age before they go to college or similar to that. So I wanted to ask, what is for example, from their parents or the community they live in, what they think about this tutoring program, and are they supporting the program as itself?
Yeah, I mean, the age inclusiveness of it is something that I had to not fight for, but I had to explain my reasoning very, very, I'm at a university asking if we can fund work with 4-year-olds. And the idea is that whole, if we just worked with 15-year-olds or 14-year-olds, the pool of people that are still in education at that point is low. And if they are in education, chances are they are already thinking about kind of sort of the manual careers, which again are wonderful careers to have, being a florist or a roofer. My dad's a roofer, my brother's a tarmacker, these are great careers, but every child should have the choice of whatever career. But you find I found that if you only work with 14-year-olds, we've already lost them. And that was how I kind of explained it, that if we can keep kids young, keep kids engaged at a young age, then we're going to fight the battle. It's going to be we'll lose a lot of battles in the process, but we're going to win the war eventually. And the sort of the second part of your question is that parents are very supportive. Of course, not some of them, the parents that aren't supportive or don't quite understand, we work with them to try and make sure they do understand. And I think that not just giving up on people, like, if they don't show up, finding out why aren't they showing up, not being like, oh, they don't want to engage. And being like, what is that crux of the issue? It's either they don't understand it, and then we talk about how actually one-to-one help can really provide that extra support, where they might think an hour a week isn't going to do anything. But the vast majority of our parents are so supportive, and what we're finding is that, because you know what it's like, I mean, when you're a kid and you go to school and you come home from school and your mum goes, how was school? And you just you go fine or terrible, and you could have had the best day in the world and you could have had a wonderful time and learned lots. But when your mum asks you over the tea table, you'll still say you had a crap day or don't talk to me about it. So then parents go, oh, they hate school. They hate it. They're not learning anything. Whereas what we're finding is, especially if you haven't been to school yourself, like, my dad left school at 11, like he wouldn't know what was happening when I said, oh, this happened. What we found is having the education in the home on top of the schoolwork is that they can see the confidence grow, and they're physically involved with it because they know the tutor and they can talk to the tutor. Unlike this sort of teacher that has 30 kids in their class, they can talk to the tutor and be like, oh, can you help so-and-so with this bit, on that bit? So that relationship builds as well. But they're seeing confidence and progression in their kid that they didn't see before. So if your child is on a tutoring lesson in front of you and you can see them loving life when they get a question right, that's going to be very different to them saying, oh, I got 10 out of 10 on my test, because it's abstract. That's abstract and this is physical. And it wouldn't work without supportive parents. And that's why it's so important to involve the parents as much as we involve the kids.
Great. Awesome. Any more questions? I also have more.
I have one very quickly. I was just curious, are there any similar schemes or projects that you know of by, say, other universities or other widening participation offices, or is it just your office at King's College that is doing such a, I don't know if intensive is the right word, but starting so young? And
yeah, there is sort of more of an appetite. I don't think that's the right word either, but sort of more universities are interested now, and I think that's because it's because of data gathering, and we're sort of starting to get a lot more data than we did 10 years ago, and so unis are seeing the stark numbers, and you can't ignore the numbers so you can't, and you kind of this, because the UK is a fee-paying university, so the £9,000 people paying fees, because of that, to charge the £9,000, universities have to have an access and participation plan. So in that is where they look to increase the representation of underrepresented groups. So as the data is coming out that Gypsies, Roma and Travellers are underrepresented, then universities are becoming more aware and putting it into their access and participation plans. We're very lucky at King's that we've got such a big widening participation department, and we've got that power to do that. But we're seeing a lot of universities that are increasing kind of, they might not be doing any work yet, but they're increasingly wanting to do work. So there's a lot more inquiries. I think there's a higher education network for universities wanting to get sort of Gypsies, Roma and Traveller sort of outreach done, which is wonderful to see. And hopefully there'll be more kind of intensive programs from lots of other people, because like, yeah, one university is never going to be enough.
Thank you.
Any more? Okay, I have another one. It just struck me what you said about the parents seeing the progress in person when they're sitting in the house. I had a question already, but that's interesting what you said, because I was wondering what you're going to do, or you're planning to do, after COVID.
So we're going to carry on. So the whole idea of the project, so after COVID happened for the first time, and we thought we were well out of it, and kids started going back to school, we carried it on, and we saw even more progress when kids were in school and they were doing this at sort of 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock or on a Saturday. So after schools reopen, the programme is currently funded to the end of this academic year, and we're pretty positive that we'll be able to carry on in some description. We don't know. With funding, I can't say, what it's going to look like. But the idea is that it was born out of COVID response, but it's not a COVID response project, because these issues happened before COVID. They'll keep on happening after COVID. So we're hoping that if we can see this much progression whilst kids are at home, that we'll be able to see sort of so much more progression when they're in school and they're doing this on top of it. And that's what we started to see between September and December, before it all, went wrong.
Okay. And I'd also like to ask if there are more questions, you can interrupt me. Okay. I would also like to ask about the kind of things that could be done. So you are working in education sphere, so maybe you could talk about some things that if you had power, or if someone who advocated for what you want had power, what could they do for Gypsy, Roma, Traveller people in their education, like as government or as councils?
Yeah. I think it'd be very dangerous if I had power. I don't think I'd be very good at it. So no, I think, oh gosh, if the world was my oyster, I think I would I'd like to make sure that everyone knew the situation in all of its nuances. So every teacher, every social worker in their training, they should know more than they do. Every university lecturer, every prison guard, every police officer, because these issues will never change unless the people that we're being trained to be in our civil society and to run our civil society know the nuances of all these different, and not just Gypsies, Roma and Travellers, but everyone, the nuances of what it's like to be a disabled person in this world, to be a Black person in this world, to be a trans person in this world. Unless we train people and give them the knowledge, or give them the signposts to get the knowledge, then we're never going to be living in a society that's suitable for everyone. So yeah, if I had the power, I'd make sure that learning of all these and teaching of all these people and politicians, or I don't know if I should get into that one, but making sure that everyone that is in these positions where they care for people, or they have, every time we go see a doctor, we put our health in their hands. When we send our children to school, we put their future in their hands. Every time we ring the police, we put our life in their hands, and these people need to be knowledgeable on so many areas that they don't know. So, yeah.
Great, awesome. Thank you for that. Any more questions? I think I could still ask more, so I can just keep going. Yes, Sheila, go ahead. I think you're muted, Sheila.
I'm trying to unmute. Sorry, there you are. Christine, am I allowed to ask you a personal question, or is it? Would you rather I did?
Go for it. I'm sure I've shared some personal stories. I'm not sure if I've got a personal life anymore.
I just wondered for you, what was it that made the difference to you that got you to where you are now? Was it an inspiring teacher, somebody that treated you with respect? It was nobody that you kind of came across?
I really wish there was, because that's what you hear lovely stories about people that a teacher changed their life. I had a rubbish time at school, and it wasn't all their fault. I was a horrible, horrible child. I had a lot of anger, and I couldn't have told you at the time what it was. I mean, with 20/20 vision, it's probably from kind of hiding half my life and half my identity. But I had a teacher that told me I'd be lucky if I didn't end up in prison. And I was like, really not doing that much, I'm sure. But for me, I was always interested in work more than education. So my dad's a traveller and my mum isn't a traveller. So when they got divorced, I moved into a house with my mum during the week and would go see my dad at weekends and holidays on sites. But one thing they instilled in me from a young age is a work ethic. And this is why I always find it funny when people talk to me about lazy travellers, because I'm like, I've never met a harder grafter than a traveller. Like, when you don't know if your home's going to be there tomorrow, you've got to earn the money today. So from the age of like 4, I was going out with my dad when he was working. Like, he was obviously, I wouldn't be cutting the trees myself, but I'd be knocking on the doors and handing out the leaflets, and this was and then it was sort of chores to keep the household going. And growing up, I think I had such a strong work ethic that education seemed so little. I was like, well, learning this isn't going to keep a roof over my head. And that's apparently not a thing a 13-year-old normally thinks about. So I left, and I was working a lot when I shouldn't have been, but I loved it. So I became a restaurant manager when I was 18. I've been working in restaurants since I was 11, and it took me across the world. I went and ran a brewery in New Zealand. I had an amazing time. Hated education, hated university, hated the idea of it. I thought all students were lazy and that they should join the real world and get a real job, and which is really funny considering my job now. But what changed for me was I realized that I didn't have a voice, and that I wasn't going anywhere, and I needed a change. Sort of, my life was quite unhealthy. I was pretty low, and I didn't know what to do. I was at a loss, and so I googled something. I'd always been interested in sort of food and cooking, and went and studied nutrition and dietetics. And the only reason I did that was because the NHS paid for the degree and I wouldn't have a student loan. I think I just realised in my mid-20s that I was a lot smarter than a lot of the teachers told me I was. And I think I just had to, sounds really ridiculous, but I think I just had to believe in myself. But yeah, I got told throughout school that I wasn't that smart. And now I've got a first-class degree from King's College London, so which is a little, sorry, I'm not normally that prideful, but
Thank you, that's great. I don't know if we have time for a quick question, or if that's it, that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can call it there. Yeah, okay. So thank you so much, Chrissie. Oh, Jade, do you have a question?
Oh no, I was.
Oh, clapping. Okay, great.